Either someone convinces me that the arguments I'm about to present are flawed, or at some point I'll just have to suck it up and join the growing trend of a herbivorous lifestyle. So I wanted to make a video presenting some, but certainly not all, of the arguments that are leading me to believe that every day of my life I commit an act so immoral that I can hardly bear to think about it, and see if any of you, by way of comment or response, can talk me out of it.
You heard it. You heard the man. CosmicSkeptic over here thinks he should become vegan because it's the only moral way to be. And he wants me to talk him out of it. I'm gonna do no such thing. I'm actually going to suggest he should be vegan, and I'll tell you why. What I will do, however, is show you how his arguments for veganism are ill-advised and highly illogical.
So, if you think that you can philosophically defend eating meat or factory farming, consider this a challenge.
He's gonna make an excellent vegan. There he is, patting himself on the back, pointing the finger at you. Listen, motherfucker. The burden of proof is on you, okay? Society at large does not believe eating meat is immoral whatsoever. You're saying it is. You need to prove why that is so. I don't need to defend anything. Logically, the burden of proof is on you. But once again, you're great at pointing the finger, and you will make an excellent vegan. One other thing that's going to make him an excellent vegan is he's already conflating eating meat with factory farming, when we all know those two don't necessarily have to go hand in hand, right? But this is what they do, these vegans. They conflate, misrepresent, straw man.
We'll discuss reasons people commonly give to justify eating meat and try to see whether or not they're flawed.
Only idiots justify eating meat. You don't have to justify anything once again, okay? And the people that do, well, they're probably just some of his 12-year-old audience. Once again, you don't have to justify eating meat because, once again, the burden of proof is on him. But I'm not saying that some members of his 12 to 16-year-old audience don't actually get trapped in justifying why they're eating meat, right? But that's because they don't understand philosophy. They don't understand logic, and that's probably because they listen to this guy.
So, with a distant hope that someone out there can stop me from fully succumbing to them, I, a current meat eater, present some arguments for veganism. With that said, here goes. So, speaking of Peter Singer, perhaps the most important animal ethicist of recent memory, I think the main philosophical takeaway from his book, which you should all definitely read by the way, I'll leave a link in the description, is this: that the boundary we've constructed between human beings and other animals is completely arbitrary and almost entirely unjustified.
We did not construct this boundary. We've only recognized that this boundary naturally exists.
Here's a good quote. In the popular mind, the term animal lumps together beings as different as oysters and chimpanzees, while placing a gulf between chimpanzees and humans, although our relationship to those apes is much closer than the oysters.
Do you have a relationship with any apes out there? I don't know any monkeys, but I sure as hell love oysters, and I have a very, very good relationship with those.
It's a fair point. Why should we consider ourselves so different from other animals, and to the extent that they're ours to do with as we please?
We don't consider ourselves different than other animals. We are different than other animals.
Here we deal with argument number 1 in favor of meat eating. Humans are superior to other animals because of X, and therefore we can eat them.
Once again, he builds a straw man. But once again, I'm not saying that there aren't some 12 to 16-year-old kids or part of his audience who don't actually make these quote-unquote arguments. But that is not the argument for why we eat meat, right? The reason why we do eat meat is because we need to eat meat in order to survive as a species. That's why we eat meat. But this isn't a justification for why we eat meat, because you don't need a justification for why you eat meat. This is simply the reason why we do.
Trying to find a quality that a being can possess to justify them treating other beings who don't have that quality differently is known to philosophers as naming the trait, or as I'm presenting it, the name the trait argument. Essentially, the argument is that it's not possible to find the trait that non-human animals supposedly lack, that if a human were to lack, we treat the human how we currently treat the animals.
So he's essentially asking you to name the trait while telling you that the trait doesn't exist. If the trait doesn't exist, why is he asking you to name it? And why do you have to play this game in the first place? Why must there be a trait that the animals lack that humans do possess that justifies us treating animals different than humans? Why? Because he says so? What's the justification for name the trait? The validity of name the trait. What's the justification for it? It doesn't exist. It's just a little trick. It's just a game. He's telling you the trait doesn't exist while asking you to name the trait. So he's telling you play this game because you can't win this game. You don't have to play this game, but we will because it's very easy to beat this game. Because it's child's play. It's nonsense. It's absurd. Check it out.
For instance, you say we kill the animals because they don't have trait X that humans do have. And the argument is, if we found a human being who themselves lacked X, would we be justified in killing them?
Obviously, the trait is human, right? If a human is not human, and whatever the hell it is, it's edible, well, go right the fuck ahead and eat it, right? What's the big deal? No big deal. But if a human is a human, well, you can't eat it. Why? Because it possesses the trait human. Very simple.
Well, let's take the earlier and more common point of intelligence. The argument from the person naming the trait would be that we can treat animals as we please because they have less intelligence than we do. That's the trait. But if we took a human being and turned them into the least intelligent human being you know of, would you flinch if I turned them upside down and slit their throat for food?
I wouldn't flinch one bit. I would terminate you right then and there, still without flinching.
Why? If the argument is that we can kill animals because they're less intelligent, then you're saying that it's merely lacking intelligence that justifies the taking of their life.
Obviously, nobody actually believes that intelligence, or the lack thereof, is a reason why we should kill and eat whatever being that lacks intelligence or certain level of intelligence, right? Because nobody actually believes, well, not anybody in their right mind, that it's okay to eat dumb people, right? Of course. Thus, this is why this is a strawman argument. Just because there are some kids who haven't thought this out because they're 12 to 16-year-olds and this is their teacher, who do actually make this argument, well, that doesn't mean that this is an actual argument. It cannot be an actual argument because these same kids don't actually believe that it's okay to eat dumb people, right? Of course. But he builds these straw men just to burn them down and pat himself on the back as if he actually said something intelligent. He didn't.
If this doesn't apply to humans too, then there's something you're leaving out of your reasoning, because it's not just intelligence. And what is that something? Well, it's invariably the mere fact that humans are the same species as you are, and that non-human animals aren't.
It's not a mere fact that all humans are the same species or that all humans possess the trait human. This is an integral part of who we are and why we do what we do. But he wants to bring it down to, it's just a mere fact. It's irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything, right? This is why veganism is anti-humanism. It rejects our humanity as something of utmost importance when we all know it is.
This, of course, has absolutely no moral relevance of its own accord.
What I tell you, this has absolutely no moral relevance on its own. Because I say so. That's not an argument. That's just an assertion. Why doesn't it? Because you say so? I disagree. Because I say so.
This, of course, has absolutely no moral relevance of its own accord, and it's just not a good enough reason to mistreat other living beings.
We don't mistreat other living beings. We simply eat food, which is exactly what they do.
It has the same ethical strength as appealing to the innate value of belonging to a certain race or gender. That is to say, it has no ethical strength.
Wrong. Dead wrong. It is completely and diametrically opposed to any moral value anybody might draw from belonging to a certain race, i.e. racism, or gender, i.e. sexism, right? Belonging to the same human species, or humanism if you will, is exactly the argument used against racism or sexism, right? The reason why we consider sexism and racism illegitimate or giving moral value to belonging to a race or a gender is precisely because of the fact that we are all part of the same human family. And the reason why our humanity trumps racism and sexism is because that is something extraordinary that we all have in common versus these little minute differences such as race or gender or culture or what have you, that make us a little bit different. And once again, the argument against the evils of racism or sexism is the fact that we are one big fucking human family, right? Speciesism is exactly what debunks racism and sexism. Thus, they are not the same. They are actually factually completely opposite ends of the spectrum.
But okay, so what about something like emotional intelligence, you might say? Human beings are more sensitive to pain than other animals. They develop complex emotional fears and attachments, not to mention the fact that we care about each other.
Didn't he just name the trait after saying that the trait doesn't exist? Which is it? You're contradicting yourself very well. You're going to make an excellent vegan.
I said a moment ago that intelligence is an arbitrary metric by which to judge moral worth.
Intelligence is not an arbitrary metric. It's a subjective metric.
I said a moment ago that intelligence is an arbitrary metric by which to judge moral worth. The ability to feel pain, however, is not. It's a matter of fact, definitionally in fact, that pain infringes on well-being. It's reasonable to consider well-being the goal of morality, even if it's just subjectively so.
So basing moral value on intelligence, he says, is arbitrary, while basing moral value on the ability to feel pain is merely subjective. Go look up arbitrary in the dictionary, and the fact that one of the synonyms for arbitrary is subjective. Now, the reason why choosing intelligence is not actually arbitrary, I mean, it could be if it really were random, if you will, right? But the reason why it isn't is because people usually employ feelings or intuition to derive at this conclusion, right? It's merely subjective. But if you want to say it's arbitrary, it's no more or less arbitrary than basing moral value on pain sensitivity. However you want to slice it, whatever semantic games you want to play, what's certain is that neither one of those two is objective. That's that one thing they have in common. And if they are not objective, logically, they must be subjective, which is why arbitrary is a synonym for subjective. And if this moral value, however you derive it, whether you base it on intelligence or the ability to feel pain, if it's subjective, then why does it have any moral value at all? If morality is subjective, then what I say is moral, no less than what you say is. Logically, right? Of course. And what do I say? Eat meat.
Ability to feel pain, at the very least, is far more relevant to moral worth than intelligence is.
Why? Because you say so? He makes all these assertions without any logic behind them, without any sort of grounding. Why? Why are these things what you say they are? Because you say they are? Well, of course, because all of this is completely and utterly arbitrary.
Okay, let's move on to something else. This might seem like an odd direction to move in, but I want to introduce you to, or remind you of, the political philosophy of John Rawls. In his famous theory of justice, Rawls presented a thought experiment that we could use to determine how best to organize society. Rawls asked us to imagine ourselves in an original position, as he put it, behind a veil of ignorance. You're about to enter society, but from this original position behind the veil, you don't know yet whether you'll be black or white, male, female, rich or poor. You don't know anything about what social characteristics you'll have when you enter this society. It's from this original position, Rawls argues, that we'd be best placed to design society, because we design the most just system without biasing it towards our own group. Essentially, we should organize society as if we didn't know who we were going to be within it, to ensure that we're designing it fairly.
And that's a wonderful thought experiment that makes perfect sense. It's very logical, right? It makes sense to strip people, if possible, of their identity or what it is that may divide them, be it race or gender or what have you. Try to have them imagine that they are simply human beings, right? That one thing that unites them. Are you seeing a theme here yet? And try to have them design a society, which is a group of people, don't ever forget that, which once they're all stripped of their biases, it's assumed they're going to design a society that's fair, right? A society that will treat any member of that society, human member of that society, equally, because once again, these people will be devoid of whatever racial, gender, cultural biases they might be going into this thought experiment with, right? Makes perfect sense when designing a human society.
Rawls' thought experiment should not just apply to human beings.
Because I say so. Why? Because you say so?
So here's my version of the thought experiment.
But the slide you presented said Rawls's experiment. Now, what you're actually talking about is not his experiment, but something else. What is this? Misdirection? Lack of honesty? What's going on here?
You're about to enter the world as a thing. As in, you could be any object in the world and you have no idea what you're going to be. So not only could you be white or black or rich or poor, you could be a brick, or a tree, or a mobile phone, or a pig, or a cow, or a human being. You could be anything. You have no way to know. Okay, so now design society.
This is completely and utterly absurd. Can you enter society as any of those things? Except as a human? Of course you can't. And now you might want to say to yourself, but as a white person, how do you enter society as a black person, right? Well, I mean, while that's not technically possible, you could, for all intents and purposes, become quote unquote black if you were white, right? Just look at Sean King or Rachel Dolezal, right? For example. Or what could happen, where this experiment would still make sense, is that if some country had laws that treated people of different races differently, and those laws were completely and utterly reversed, where the privileged group would all of a sudden become the downtrodden, and the downtrodden the privileged group, you would, in effect, even though you wouldn't, as let's say a white person become black or vice versa, you would still receive those privileges or the lack thereof, right? So the experiment makes sense because it's very pragmatic and practical and can actually happen in real life, if not exactly as it is described, for all intents and purposes, pragmatically, essentially the same, right? Now let me ask you again, can you enter a society as a member of that society as a brick when a society is a group of people? And should bricks or chickens or pigs have a say in how a group of people organize themselves? This is completely and utterly absurd. Not only is it completely and utterly impossible for this to happen, well, it doesn't make any sense because animals are not part of human society. Because society is once again a group of people. And, you know, don't even get me started about you being a brick or a broom or whatever.
Knowing that you could be a brick in this original position wouldn't make you want to prevent bricks from being used in construction. If you were a brick, you wouldn't know you're a brick, and you wouldn't feel any pain. You wouldn't feel anything. It shouldn't bother you at all.
You couldn't. You can't know that because it's impossible to be a brick. This experiment doesn't make any sense. Let's entertain this fool for a second. If I knew that I could be a brick, the chances of me being a brick were pretty high. I would structure society to try to animate bricks, right? Implant brains into bricks, worship bricks, try to make bricks into humans, dedicate society's, every resource, every last drop of energy into making the bricks human. Well, that's what I would want to do, right? I mean, this is how absurd this shit is, right? You're setting up an impossible scenario. Well, what the fuck do you expect me to say? You're saying some dumb shit. If I'm going to engage you in this dumbass argument, I'm going to say some dumb shit too, right?
But you wouldn't mind being a chair because you're not sentient, so who cares if people are sitting on you?
Because you say so? Of course I would mind being a chair. The whole point is that you don't want to be a fucking chair. So you're going to design society to make chairs, not have to deal with stank asses, basically.
But would you mind being a chicken? Would you mind being a factory farmed chicken?
No, I wouldn't, because I would know that I'm a chicken. You honestly telling me that chickens have that much self-awareness that they know that they are chickens? Clearly, you've never had chickens, because all that a chicken is an organic robot that walks around all day pecking at shit, hoping that whatever the fuck it pecks at is actually edible and won't kill it. Good luck, buddy.
Of course you would.
So he's completely honest when it comes to bricks, right? Because, well, bricks are inanimate objects and bricks just don't give a fuck, right? But when it comes to the chicken, all of a sudden, that chicken has a human brain in it. How is that for honesty? I mean, the whole thing is just retarded from beginning to end, right? It doesn't make any sense. And he's gonna blame poor old fucking Rawls for this shit when he came up with the nonsense. Yeah, brilliant, buddy. Brilliant.
And if you were really in this original position, you would abolish the meat industry immediately.
Really? That's what chickens do. They spend every single waking hour trying to abolish the meat industry. That's what he's saying. That's what chickens do. Fucking fool. This is one of YouTube's more prominent young philosophers? Really? This guy? Fuck, man. If that's true, I mean, we're fucked, people. The world is going to hell in a handbasket. Believe it.
On to the next point, and this is about equality between humans and animals. Surely, you might argue, it's ridiculous to try to draw such an equality between humans and animals. There are quite easily detectable differences, both physically and cognitively, between them.
Did he just name the trait again, or insinuate that many traits exist after he said that they don't? He's contradicting himself yet again. He's gonna make an excellent vegan, guys.
I might just as easily say something like it's foolish to draw an equality between black people and white people because there are clearly identifiable physical and cultural differences between them.
Racist. I'm just playing, guys. Racist.
But this would completely miss the point. We don't condemn racism because all races are equal. They're not.
We condemn racism because we're all human.
But the whole point of racial justice is not to deny these differences, but to point out that these differences are completely irrelevant to determining whether or not someone deserves life and freedom. It's not about saying that there are no differences between us, but that despite our differences, we all have an equal moral worth.
And why do we have an equal moral worth, even though we're different in some ways? Why is that? He never really grounds this in anything. While I'm telling you the reason why we are of equal moral value is because we're all part of the same human family, right? Because we are all equally human is the reason why we all have equal moral value, right? How did he ground his moral value? In the ability to feel pain? So if you give somebody a painkiller, a very, very, very fucking strong one, they lose their moral value? And all of that after he admitted that grounding moral value in something like intelligence is worthless because it's arbitrary or subjective, and then went on to ground moral value in something that's completely subjective or arbitrary. He completely and utterly contradicts and refutes himself, right? Of course. He's gonna make a really good vegan, guys.
The same applies to differences in gender and social class, and arguably, species.
Wrong again, because speciesism is diametrically opposed to racism and sexism, right? It's the very argument we use to debunk the evils of the aforementioned two.
In other words, to answer the claim that it's ridiculous to see animals and humans as equals, you don't have to in order to recognize that they both have moral worth. But you don't even have to think that human beings and non-human animals do have an equal moral worth in order to justify veganism. There are many ways in which we might determine a human being to have more moral worth than a non-human animal. For instance, human beings have an awareness of the future that most animals lack.
There he goes, naming the trait again, after he said you can't name the trait because it doesn't exist. Contradicting and refuting everything he says.
If we were killing humans for food, it would just cause pandemonium amongst all of us, but this wouldn't happen with, say, chickens who don't know what's going to happen to them.
Oh, really? Is it perhaps because they have bricks for brains? So a couple of minutes ago, chickens had human brains and were staging a revolution to overthrow the factory farming system, right? And once again, all of a sudden, chickens are just chickens again. How fucking convenient, right? Convenient reasoning. Once again, this guy is a walking, talking contradiction.
Now this is a relevant difference in the sense that if we have to have an industry that converts living beings into meat, it makes far more moral sense to do this to chickens than to humans because of this difference. However, this presupposes that we do need such an industry at all, which is simply not the case. It might be more moral to kill chickens for food than to kill humans for food, but that doesn't make it actually moral to do either of these. It's more moral to just murder someone than to rape and murder them, but neither of these is moral. So even if we do see animals as having less moral worth than humans, this doesn't justify us treating them as though they have no moral worth at all.
No, we don't see animals as having less moral worth than human. We see animals as not having any moral worth because they're not human. Only humans have moral worth. Animals do not. This is one way you could ground moral worth, right? Something he hasn't done yet. He just makes these statements and assertions because he does, without grounding them in anything. He doesn't arrive at these conclusions logically. He's just saying it is this way because I say it is this way, while at the same time completely and utterly contradicting himself and refuting everything he himself says exists, right? None of his philosophy, if you could call it that, is grounded in anything. It's just all baseless assertions.
But this is an interesting consideration. Should we consider the life of a pig as equally morally valuable to the life of a human? Well, no. At least you don't have to. I can't count the number of times I've heard someone say to vegans something along the lines of, well, if you were on a desert island with a pig and a human being and you were about to starve, which one would you kill and eat? You'd kill the pig? See, pigs are worth less than humans. Okay, let's just think about these kinds of comments for a minute. I'll ask you another question. If you were on a desert island with two humans, one elderly, frail and disabled, the other youthful, intelligent, talented and promising, and you were about to starve, which person would you eat? I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that you should kill the elderly person if you have to kill one of them. But here's the thing. You don't have to kill either. That's just not the situation we're in.
Right. It's an absurd example. Just like his bastardization of John Rawls's thought experiment, right? Completely and utterly absurd. He's once again contradicting himself. You will never be reincarnated as a brick or a chicken, right? His thought experiment, he just told you, was bullshit.
Just because you'd rather kill the elderly person than the youthful one because you think they have less moral worth, doesn't justify us setting up a meat industry in the real world where we kill and eat the elderly.
Just for the record, if that were me and I had to do it, I'd fucking kill them both. Or I would ask the elderly person to help me kill the young, strong person, and then I would take out the elderly person myself, right? But, you know, hey, not that I've ever considered these scenarios or anything like that. And this is a problem that I've had with some of these vegans and their absurd hypotheticals, or you can't even call them hypotheticals because they're impossible. And a hypothetical has to be possible, or in other words, it cannot be absurd, right? It cannot be impossible. They don't make any sense. They're not even hypotheticals. It's just gibberish, right? It's completely impractical, absurd bullshit with no relevance to the real world. Thus, you cannot glean any lessons from it because it's bullshit.
We no longer live in a world that requires meat consumption to sustain even our health, let alone our lives.
Because I say so. This guy, he just makes a bunch of baseless assertions, contradicting himself all the damn time, proving that he's nothing but a hypocrite. He asks you to name the trait, while at the same time telling you that it's impossible, but you must play this game, and when you play this game, you name the trait and you win the game. He says, no, fuck your trait, I reject your trait after I told you to name it and you named it and you won the game. I'm just gonna move the goalpost and talk about some other bullshit, keep on contradicting myself and acting like I'm actually saying something, when in reality I'm not grounding any of my ideas in anything, because while I'm saying that this is so because I say so, 2 seconds later, or sometimes even in the same sentence, I completely and utterly refute what I just said as bullshit, right? But that's veganism for you. This is what it is. It's absurd. It doesn't make any sense. It's built on a whole bunch of beliefs about the world that are not grounded in reality, right? I know I'm preaching to the choir once again, but all of you guys know, at least those of you that are subscribed to me, and not just for the simple reason of wanting to thumb down every single video I upload. You guys know that we need meat in order to survive, right? And this is yet another reason how vegans shift the burden of proof. The burden of proof is on them. They have to prove that the Homo sapiens that has evolved eating meat for millions of years, well, maybe not the Homo sapiens, but whatever. Let's not get into that whole thing. Talking about how our fucking monkey cousins, get the fuck out of here. Oh, these poor bastards, man. They know nothing, do they? Anyway, the burden of proof is on the vegan to prove that we can survive as a species without eating meat. And they have not met that burden of proof. They've just assumed to have the higher moral ground. They've assumed to have the science on their side. This guy has never read any studies. He's never investigated these claims. I don't know if he's completely ignorant of all the ex-vegans, all the people failing on the death diet, getting sick, some people dying because of the vegan diet. I don't know if he's completely and blissfully unaware of this nonsense, or if he's just ignoring it because, you know, he wants to get those vegan subs. I don't know. But I'm going to assume that he is what he says, which is a philosopher, meaning he's actually interested in the truth and he's an honest person. I think he is. And I'm going to suggest that he becomes vegan. I think he should become vegan because ultimately he believes that morality is subjective, as he aptly demonstrated in this little video here, right? So whatever he says is moral must thus be moral. So because this is how he feels about the world, and he believes that this is moral because what he believes must, by his definition of what's moral, be moral, he needs to become vegan, right? And he needs to prove this hypothesis that he could survive on the vegan diet. And my hypothesis is that he can't, and I want him to learn the hard way because he's an honest guy and he has a big following, and we're going to monitor his progress. We're going to watch his eyes sink into his fucking skull, right? We're going to see his already pale skin get even paler. We're going to watch him get either skinny fat or just fucking skinny. We're going to see all the shit that we've been seeing. His philosophy is going to go from very poor to piss poor. Brain fog is going to set in. You know, you know, of course you do. If you're watching this channel and been so for a while, you know what's going to happen. And we're going to be there to catch you when you fall on your ass, homie. So please, pretty motherfucking please become vegan. Because you're an honest man, you're a philosopher, you're interested in the truth, and once the death diet fails your ass, you're gonna come out to, by then, probably a couple of million of your subscribers, and you're gonna tell them exactly what happened and exactly how wrong you were. So I would never want to dissuade you from becoming vegan. Your philosophy is bunk. It's trash. It's garbage. You don't know anything about anything. You're just a little fucking kid who needs to learn the hard way. So please, pretty motherfucking please become vegan and keep it real, homie. Thanks for watching, guys.
We no longer live in a world that requires meat consumption to sustain even our health, let alone our lives.